The day humanity chose battle, the Galactic Council believed it was the end. The massive alien warship emerged from a tear in space itself, and every alarm on Earth began to scream at the same moment. This was the day humanity had feared since they first looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone. Admiral Danny Harmon stood on the bridge of the Earth defense vessel Defiance, his hands steady despite the cold dread spreading through his chest. He was 62 years old and had spent 4 decades preparing for a war he hoped would never come. But hope was a luxury he could no longer afford. The alien vessel was enormous beyond human imagination, stretching nearly 50 kilometers from bow to stern, and its dark hull seemed to absorb light itself. Behind it, more ships appeared, hundreds of them, then thousands, filling the space around Earth's moon like locusts descending upon a field. "Admiral, we are receiving a transmission," said Lieutenant Maria Santos, her voice barely above a whisper. She was young, only 24, and she had never seen anything like this. "Put it through," Harmon replied, and he forced himself to breathe slowly as the main screen flickered to life. The creature that appeared was unlike anything humans had encountered in their 3 centuries of space exploration. It stood over 8 feet tall, covered in dark green scales, with 4 eyes that gleamed like polished obsidian. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I am Ambassador Zorveth of the Galactic Council, representative of the 12 elder species who have governed this galaxy for longer than your world has existed. You will listen carefully, for I will not repeat myself." Harmon said nothing. He simply watched and waited, knowing that every word he spoke would be analyzed and judged. "Humanity has expanded beyond your rightful boundaries," Zorveth continued, "and you have developed weapons that threaten the established order. The Council has therefore decided that you will surrender immediately. You will dismantle your fleet, abandon your colonies, and accept classification as a protected species under our guidance. You have 72 hours to comply, and if you refuse, we will remove you from existence as we have removed others before you." The transmission ended, and silence filled the bridge of the Defiance. Harmon looked at his crew, at the men and women who had sworn to defend Earth, and he saw fear in their eyes. But he also saw something else, something that burned beneath the fear like embers waiting for wind. On Earth's surface, Secretary-General Katie Morrison watched the same transmission in the Geneva Assembly Hall. Representatives from every nation sat in stunned silence around her, their faces pale and drawn. The military analysts had already run their calculations, and the numbers were devastating. 4,000 warships, General Marcus Webb reported, his voice grim. "Their technology is at least 2 centuries ahead of ours, and their shields can withstand anything in our current arsenal. Our 800 vessels would be destroyed within hours if we engage them directly." Katie Morrison was 58 years old, a former combat pilot who had risen through the ranks of diplomacy after losing her husband in a mining accident on Mars. She had 2 children, her daughter safe in a bunker beneath the Swiss Alps, and her son serving as a captain in the fleet that now faced annihilation. Quote, "What does protected species status actually mean?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. Commander Chris Porter of Earth Intelligence stepped forward. He was a thin man with tired eyes, and he had spent 20 years studying every scrap of information humanity had gathered about the Galactic Council. "It means slavery," he said bluntly. "The Valkyrie accepted protected status 8,000 years ago. They were artists and philosophers, known throughout the galaxy for their beauty and wisdom. Today they work in mines on barren asteroids, their culture erased, their children raised to serve. The Fen refused protection 2,000 years ago, and they no longer exist. Their homeworld is a burned rock, kept as a warning to others." The assembly erupted in chaos, voices shouting over one another, some demanding immediate surrender, others calling for defiance. Katie Morrison let them argue for several minutes before she raised her hand for silence. "I want to speak with the alien ambassador directly," she said. "Arrange a secure channel." 2 hours later, she stood before a screen that showed Zorveth in his quarters aboard the Council flagship. The ambassador seemed almost amused by her request. "You wish to negotiate?" he asked. "There is nothing to negotiate, Secretary General. The terms are absolute." "I am not here to negotiate," Katie replied, and her voice was calm, despite the storm raging in her heart. "I am here to understand. Tell me, Ambassador, how many species have you destroyed?" Zorveth's 4 eyes blinked in surprise. No one had ever asked him such a question. 47, he answered after a moment. 47 species have chosen extinction over acceptance. They were all fools who could not recognize the inevitable. "And how many accepted your protection?" 112. They understood wisdom when they saw it. Katie nodded slowly, and something shifted in her expression, something that made even the ancient ambassador feel a flicker of uncertainty. "Let me tell you about humanity," she said. "We have been killing each other since before we learned to write. We have survived ice ages, plagues, famines, and wars that nearly destroyed us completely. We have split the atom, walked on our moon, and spread to the stars not because we were strong, but because we refused to die." She paused, and when she spoke again, her words cut through space like a blade. "You offer us chains and call it protection. You threaten us with death and expect gratitude. But you have made a critical error, Ambassador. You have studied our technology, our military strength, our population. You have calculated our chances and found them hopeless. But you have failed to understand the one thing that matters." "And what is that?" Zorveth demanded. "You assumed we were afraid to die." The screen went dark, and across the void of space, 800 human warships came alive. Their engines blazed like newborn stars, and their weapons powered up with a hum that resonated through every hull. Admiral Harmon addressed his fleet through the command channel, and his voice was steady as stone. "All ships, this is Admiral Harmon. The Council believes this will be easy. They believe we will break. They believe our fear will overcome our spirit. But they do not know us. They do not know what we have survived. They do not know that every single one of us would rather die free than live as slaves." He looked out at the stars, at the enemy fleet waiting like predators in the dark, and he smiled, not with joy, but with the grim satisfaction of a man who has made peace with his fate. "Today, we show them what humanity truly is. Today, we make them remember our name. All ships, prepare for battle." On Earth, in bunkers and shelters across every continent, 8 billion humans watched their fleet advance toward impossible odds. Children clutched their parents, and the elderly whispered prayers to gods both old and new. No one knew if they would see tomorrow, but every single one of them knew one thing with absolute certainty. They would not surrender. They would never surrender. The day humanity chose battle had begun, and the Galactic Council would soon learn that some species cannot be broken. They can only be killed, and killing them comes at a price that no empire can afford to pay. The day humanity chose battle, the Galactic Council believed it was the end. While Secretary General Katie Morrison bought time with diplomacy, Admiral Danny Harmon worked in the shadows aboard a secret station hidden deep within the asteroid belt. The facility had no name, no record in any database, and its existence was known to fewer than 100 people in all of human civilization. The War Council gathered in a room carved from solid rock, their faces lit by the glow of tactical displays that showed the enemy fleet in terrifying detail. Vice Admiral Megan Torres of the Pacific Squadron sat to Harmon's right, her dark eyes scanning the data with the intensity of a hawk watching prey. Rear Admiral Ben Crawford of the Mars Defense Force occupied the seat to his left, his scarred face a testament to 30 years of service in the void. We cannot win a direct engagement, Crawford said flatly. Even if every ship in our fleet performs beyond expectations, we would be destroyed in less than 6 hours. The mathematics are clear. Mathematics do not account for everything, Torres replied. The Council expects us to fight like every other species they have conquered. They expect defensive formations, last stands around our homeworld, predictable tactics born from fear. Harmon nodded slowly, and he pulled up a new display that showed a series of satellites scattered throughout the solar system. This is Project Longbow, he said. For the past 40 years, our scientists have been developing something the Council has never seen. These satellites can generate focused gravitational pulses, waves of force that can crush matter itself. Dr. Nathan Webb stepped forward. He was the architect of Longbow, a physicist who had dedicated his entire career to this single impossible dream. His hair had turned white from decades of stress, and his hands trembled slightly as he manipulated the display. The technology is experimental, Webb admitted. We have never tested it at full power, and the satellites will burn out after a single use. But if we can lure the enemy fleet into a concentrated formation, we can eliminate a significant portion of their forces in one strike. How significant? Torres asked. Between 500 and 1,000 vessels, depending on how tightly they cluster. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Even if Longbow worked perfectly, they would still face 3,000 enemy warships with their diminished fleet. It is not enough, Crawford said quietly. We need more. Then we give them more, Harmon replied. We do not fight this war the way they expect. We attack first, we strike hard, and we make them pay for every inch of space they take. On Earth, Colonel Ashley Grant coordinated the largest evacuation in human history. Underground bunkers that had been secretly constructed over the past century now opened their doors to millions of civilians. Families descended into the earth carrying only what they could hold, leaving behind homes and possessions that might never exist again. Ashley was 45 years old, a mother of 3 whose husband served aboard the Defiance. She had not heard from him in 2 days, and she did not know if she would ever hear from him again. But she kept moving, kept working, kept saving lives because that was all she could do. How many are we losing? She asked her aide, Lieutenant Kevin Marshall. Approximately 12% are refusing evacuation, Kevin reported. Some are elderly and cannot make the journey. Others simply refuse to hide underground while their families fight above. Ashley closed her eyes for a moment, and she thought of her own children safe in a bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains. They were too young to understand what was happening, and she had told them it was an adventure, a camping trip in a special cave. Her oldest daughter, only 8 years old, had asked why Mommy was crying if it was supposed to be fun. Let those who wish to stay remain, Ashley said finally. We cannot force people to save themselves. Focus on the children and those who want to live. Back in Geneva, Katie Morrison prepared for one final transmission to the Council. Her advisors had begged her to retreat to the bunkers, to preserve the continuity of government, but she refused. If humanity was going to die, she would die in the light, not hiding in a hole. The screen flickered to life, and Ambassador Zorveth appeared once more. His expression had shifted from amusement to something resembling curiosity. You have 12 hours remaining, he said. I confess I did not expect you to wait so long. Most species surrender within the first day. We are not most species, Katie replied. So I am beginning to understand. Tell me, Secretary General, do you truly believe you can win this war? Katie shook her head slowly, and her honesty seemed to surprise the ambassador. No, she admitted. I do not believe we can win. Our fleet is outnumbered, our technology is inferior, and your experience spans millennia, while ours spans mere centuries. By every logical measure, we should surrender and accept whatever fate you offer. Then why do you resist? Katie leaned forward, and her eyes burned with something that made even an ancient ambassador feel small. Because surrender is not in our nature. Because every generation of humanity has faced extinction and refused to accept it. Because our ancestors survived ice ages with nothing but fire and determination. Because we would rather burn than bow. She stood, and her voice rose until it filled the hall. You want to know what humanity is, Ambassador? We are the species that sent men to the moon, on rockets built with less computing power than a child's toy. We are the species that cured diseases that killed billions through sheer stubborn refusal to accept death. We are the species that looked at the void between stars and said, "We will cross it," when every calculation said it was impossible. Zorveth remained silent, and for the first time in centuries, he felt something he did not recognize. Later, he would realize it was doubt. You believe this will be our end, Katie continued. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps tomorrow your fleet will reduce our world to ash, and our name will be forgotten like all the others. But I promise you this, you will remember the fight. You will remember what it cost you. And every species in this galaxy will know that when humanity faced the darkness, we did not go quietly. The transmission ended, and Katie Morrison walked out of the assembly hall into the night air. Above her, the stars shone cold and distant, and somewhere among them, her son prepared to die, defending everything she loved. She did not cry. There would be time for tears later, or there would be no time at all. Instead, she looked up at the heavens and whispered words that no one else could hear. Make them pay, Tyler. Make them remember us. In the asteroid belt, Admiral Harmon gave his final orders. The human fleet would divide into 12 strike groups, each assigned a specific target within the enemy formation. They would attack from multiple angles simultaneously, forcing the Council to spread their defenses thin. This is not a battle we can win through strength alone, Harmon told his commanders. We win by making them afraid. We win by showing them that victory over humanity comes with a price they cannot afford. We win by being so terrifying that even if we fall, no one will ever try this again. The commanders dispersed to their ships, and the fleet began its silent approach toward the enemy. In 12 hours, the battle would begin, and the galaxy would learn what humanity was truly made of. They were not warriors by nature. They were survivors, dreamers, builders of impossible things. But when pushed to the edge of extinction, they became something else entirely, something ancient and primal, something that had burned in their blood since the first human picked up a rock and refused to be prey. The Council believed humanity would break. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The day humanity chose battle, the Galactic Council believed it was the end. The Council fleet advanced toward Earth in a formation called the Crescent of Domination, a tactical arrangement that had crushed more than 40 civilizations across 10,000 years of galactic warfare. Supreme Commander Velthax stood at the center of the formation, aboard his flagship, the Eternal Judgment, and he watched the human vessels with the casual confidence of a predator who has never known defeat. They are moving, one of his officers reported. The human fleet has left their defensive positions around the third planet. Velthax's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his species. He was a Karathi, an insectoid warrior race that had served the Council as military enforcers for 3 millennia, and he had personally overseen the destruction of 6 civilizations. They are attacking us? He asked, genuinely surprised. I have never seen a species choose annihilation so eagerly. Admiral Danny Harmon watched the enemy formation through the tactical display aboard the Defiance, and he felt a grim satisfaction at their response. The Council expected humanity to huddle around Earth, to form defensive lines and wait for death. Instead, they were doing the opposite. All strike groups, begin your approach, he ordered through the command channel. Remember your targets and trust your training. Today we show them what humanity can do. The human fleet divided like a river splitting around stones. 12 strike groups racing toward different sections of the enemy formation. Strike Group 7, led by Captain Tyler Morrison, headed directly for the Council's communication vessels. If they could disrupt enemy coordination, the advantage of numbers would mean less. Tyler was 28 years old, and he looked remarkably like his mother. He had her dark hair, her sharp eyes, and her absolute refusal to accept defeat. When the call for volunteers had gone out, he had been the first to step forward. "Group 7, stay tight," he said to his 40 ships. "We punch through their screen, hit the comm relays, and get out. Do not engage anything you do not have to." Lieutenant Commander Lisa Brennan flew her fighter at the front of the formation, her hands steady on the controls, despite the terror clawing at her chest. She was part of the vanguard, the pilots whose job was to draw fire away from the larger vessels. Statistically, 90% of vanguard pilots did not survive first contact. "I see them," she said into her comm. "Council interceptors, bearing 270, at least 200. "Take them," Tyler ordered. "Clear us a path." Lisa pushed her throttle forward, and her fighters screamed into the darkness. Around her, 30 other pilots did the same, their vessels forming a wall of fire that slammed into the Council's interceptors. Plasma bolts filled the void like deadly rain, and ships on both sides began to die. On the bridge of the Defiance, Admiral Harmon watched the casualty reports scroll across his screen. 10 ships lost in the first 5 minutes, then 20, then 30. The Council's weapons were devastating, punching through human shields like paper. But humanity was not retreating. Strike Group 3, under Vice Admiral Torres, hit the Council's left flank with everything they had. Her ships unleashed missiles by the thousands, overwhelming point defense systems that had never faced such volume of fire. 2 Council destroyers exploded in brilliant flashes of light, the first enemy vessels to fall. "Keep pushing," Torres commanded. "Give them no time to recover." Supreme Commander Velthax frowned as reports flooded his command center. This was not how inferior species were supposed to fight. They were supposed to be defensive, frightened, easy to contain. Instead, the humans were attacking from every direction at once, accepting horrific losses to inflict damage wherever they could. "They are insane," one of his officers muttered. "No," Velthax replied slowly. "They are desperate. But desperation changes nothing. Increase power to forward shields and crush the center group." The Eternal Judgment turned its massive weapons toward Admiral Harmon's command group, and beams of energy that could crack moons lanced through space. The human destroyer Valor took a direct hit and vanished in a ball of fire. 3 more ships followed in the next minute. Harmon gripped his console as the Defiance shuddered from a near miss, and he watched his fleet dying around him. They had known this would happen, known that the first phase of the battle would be slaughter. But they needed the Council to chase them, to cluster together, to think they were winning. "All groups, begin tactical withdrawal toward Earth," he ordered. "Make it look like a retreat." The human ships turned and ran, and the Council fleet followed like wolves chasing wounded prey. Velthax allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he watched the enemy flee. This was how it always ended, with the lesser species running back to their homeworld for one final desperate stand. "Pursue them," he commanded. "Maintain formation and prepare for planetary bombardment." The Council fleet compressed as it gave chase, 3,000 vessels drawing closer together as they approached Earth. They passed the orbit of Mars, then the asteroid belt, completely focused on the retreating human fleet. They did not notice the 17 satellites hidden among the rocks. Dr. Nathan Webb sat in a control room buried deep beneath the surface of Earth, his fingers hovering over a single button. Monitors showed him the position of every Council ship, and a computer calculated the optimal moment for activation. "They are in position," his assistant reported. "Density is at 87% of maximum." Webb's hand trembled. This was the moment everything depended on. If Longbow failed, humanity would have nothing left. Admiral Harmon's voice came through the comm, steady as stone. Fire. Webb pressed the button. Across the asteroid belt, 17 satellites came alive with power that humans had never controlled. Gravitational waves, focused and amplified beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen, tore through the fabric of space itself. The waves converged on the center of the Council formation, where 800 of their most powerful warships flew in tight formation. For a single instant, gravity in that region increased by a factor of 10,000. The Council ships in the center simply ceased to exist. Metal hulls that could withstand nuclear explosions crumpled like paper. Warriors who had conquered worlds were crushed into points smaller than atoms. 800 vessels became 800 specks of light that faded into nothing. Supreme Commander Velthax stared at his tactical display in absolute shock. A fifth of his fleet had vanished in less than a second, destroyed by a weapon that should not exist. "What was that?" he demanded. "What did they do?" No one could answer him. Nothing in Council history had ever produced such devastation. For the first time in 3,000 years of warfare, a Karathi Supreme Commander felt fear. On the bridge of the Defiance, Admiral Harmon allowed himself a single moment of satisfaction. They had hurt the Council, hurt them badly, proven that humanity could draw blood from the greatest power in the galaxy. But the moment passed quickly. The satellites had burned out exactly as Webb predicted, and 2,400 enemy ships still remained. Humanity had lost 400 vessels in the attack, nearly half their fleet. The battle was far from over. "All ships, prepare for Phase 2, Harmon ordered. "We have their attention. Now we make them pay for every inch of space between here and Earth." Across the void, human and Council vessels turned to face each other once more. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath as the greatest battle in galactic history continued. Humanity had proven they could fight. Now they had to prove they could survive. The day humanity chose battle, the Galactic Council believed it was the end. The battle raged for 16 hours without pause, and the void between Earth and Mars became a graveyard of shattered metal and frozen bodies. Human ships fought with a ferocity that defied explanation, attacking vessels 10 times their size, ramming enemies when their weapons failed, dying by the hundreds to take enemies with them. Supreme Commander Velthax had never experienced anything like this. In 3,000 years of warfare, he had faced species that surrendered, species that fled, species that fought bravely but ultimately broke. He had never faced a species that simply refused to acknowledge defeat. "Supreme Commander," one of his officers reported, voice trembling, "we have lost another 100 vessels in the past hour. At this rate, we will suffer 50% casualties before reaching Earth." Velthax stared at the tactical display, watching human ships throw themselves at his fleet like fire ants attacking a giant. Each human vessel that died took at least one Council ship with it, sometimes 2 or 3. They were trading their lives at a ratio that should have been impossible. "Order a tactical withdrawal," he said finally, and the words tasted like ash in his mouth. "We will regroup at the 4th planet and reassess our strategy." For the first time in galactic history, a Council fleet turned its back on a lesser species and retreated. On the bridge of the Defiance, Admiral Harmon watched the enemy vessels pull away, and he felt no joy. Around him, his crew worked in exhausted silence, their faces gray with fatigue and grief. They had won a victory, but the cost had been devastating. "Casualty report," he said quietly. 412 vessels lost, his first officer replied. "Approximately 60,000 personnel killed or missing. We have 388 ships remaining, many with significant damage." Harmon closed his eyes for a moment. 60,000 lives, gone in 16 hours. Sons and daughters, fathers and mothers, friends and lovers, all of them reduced to debris floating in the void. What about the Council fleet? We estimate 800 destroyed in the initial longbow strike, plus another 300 in the subsequent engagement. They have approximately 1,900 vessels remaining. The mathematics were still against them. Humanity had traded half their fleet for less than half of the enemy's. But they had proven something far more valuable than numbers could show. They had proven that humanity would not break. Captain Tyler Morrison's voice crackled through the comm. He had survived the attack on the communication vessels, though his strike group had been reduced from 40 ships to 11. "Admiral, what are your orders?" "Rest," Harmon replied. "Get your crews some sleep, and repair what damage you can. The Council will not stay away for long." Across the solar system, the medical frigate Mercy worked without rest. Captain Ryan Chen had not slept in 30 hours, and his ship overflowed with wounded from a dozen shattered vessels. The cargo bays had been converted to emergency wards, and the corridors were lined with injured sailors, waiting for treatment. Nurse Stephanie Lawson moved through the chaos with mechanical efficiency, triaging patients based on severity. She had been trained for mass casualty events, but nothing could truly prepare someone for this. The screams of the dying mixed with the moans of the wounded, and the air smelled of blood and antiseptic. A young ensign grabbed her arm as she passed, his eyes wide with terror. Half his body was covered in burns from a plasma fire, and she could see that he would not survive. "Am I going to be okay?" he asked, and his voice was that of a child, not a warrior. Stephanie looked at him, at this boy who had volunteered to defend his world, and she made herself smile. "You are going to be fine," she lied. "Just rest now, we will take care of you." She held his hand until he stopped breathing. Then she moved to the next patient, and the next, and the next. There would be time for tears later, or there would be no time at all. On Earth, Secretary General Katie Morrison addressed the world from the ruins of the Geneva Assembly Hall. The building had been damaged by debris from a destroyed satellite, and she stood among the rubble like a statue, carved from determination. "Today, humanity faced the greatest threat in our history," she said, and her voice was carried to every screen on the planet. "Today we lost 60,000 of our brothers and sisters, our sons and daughters, defending the world we love. But today, we also proved something that the galaxy will never forget." She paused, and when she spoke again, her words rang like steel. "We proved that humanity cannot be conquered. The Galactic Council came to enslave us, and we made them bleed. They came expecting sheep, and they found wolves. They believed this would be our end, but it has become their nightmare." In bunkers across the planet, billions of humans watched their leaders speak, and something stirred in their hearts. They had been afraid, terrified of the alien fleet that darkened their skies. But fear was giving way to something stronger: pride, defiance, and an ancient fury that had burned in human blood since the dawn of time. Ambassador Zorveth observed the transmission from the Council flagship, and he felt a cold certainty settling in his chest. He had studied humanity for decades, analyzed their history and culture, dismissed them as primitives who told exaggerated stories of their own greatness. Now he understood that those stories were not exaggerations, they were warnings. "Supreme Commander," he said to Velthax, "I recommend we reconsider our approach." "Reconsider?" Velthax's mandibles clicked with anger. "They have killed 1,100 of our ships. There will be no negotiation now, only annihilation." "That is precisely what concerns me," Zorveth replied. "Every species we have ever conquered broke after sufficient losses. The Velkari surrendered after losing 30% of their fleet. The Then lasted longer, but even they eventually attempted to flee. Humanity has lost over half their forces, and they are still fighting. More than that, they are celebrating." He pulled up images from Earth's surface, people dancing in the streets despite the destruction, children waving flags, elderly men and women raising their fists to the sky in defiance. They are not behaving like a species facing extinction, Zorveth continued. They are behaving like a species that has already won. Velthax studied the images, and for the first time, doubt crept into his ancient warrior's heart. He had destroyed civilizations, broken empires, ended species that had existed for millions of years, but he had never faced anything like this. "What do you suggest?" he asked finally. "Overwhelming force," Zorveth replied. "Call for reinforcements from the core worlds. Bring every available ship. When we strike again, we must end this quickly, before their madness spreads." Velthax nodded slowly. The ambassador was right. Humanity was a disease that had to be eliminated before it infected the rest of the galaxy. But as he gave the orders for reinforcement, a small voice in his mind whispered a question he could not silence. What if overwhelming force was not enough? What if nothing was enough? The second wave would come in 48 hours, and it would bring death on a scale humanity had never imagined. But in bunkers and shelters across Earth, in shipyards and factories that had never stopped working, in the hearts of 8 billion people who refused to surrender, a response was already forming. Humanity had 48 hours to prepare for the end of everything. They intended to make those hours count. The day humanity chose battle, the Galactic Council believed it was the end. The second wave arrived exactly 48 hours after the Council's retreat, and it was larger than anything humanity had faced before. 3,000 warships emerged from hyperspace in a formation designed to prevent another concentrated strike. Spreading across the void like a net closing around Earth, Admiral Danny Harmon stood on the bridge of the Defiance, now scarred with battle damage that the repair crews had barely managed to patch. Around him, the remains of humanity's fleet, 380 vessels, prepared for what everyone knew would be their final stand. "Admiral," Lieutenant Maria Santos reported, "I am detecting additional contacts. Civilian vessels, sir. Hundreds of them." Harmon turned to the tactical display and saw what she meant. From every corner of the solar system, ships were converging on Earth's position. Mining vessels from the asteroid belt, cargo haulers from the outer planets, construction ships from the orbital shipyards. Every vessel that could fly and carry a weapon was joining the fleet. Commander Kevin Marshall's voice came through the comm. He had volunteered to lead the civilian auxiliary force. 300 ships, crewed by miners and transport pilots, and ordinary workers who had never fired a weapon in anger. "Admiral, the civilian defense force is ready," Kevin said. "We are not soldiers, but we can fly and we can fight. Tell us where you need us." Harmon felt something tighten in his chest. These were not warriors, not trained combatants. They were teachers and farmers, engineers and artists, people who should have been safe in bunkers instead of flying into the darkness to die. "Take position between the enemy fleet and the orbital habitats," he ordered. 7 million civilians refused to evacuate. "Protect them with everything you have." "Understood, Admiral. We will not let them down." The Council fleet advanced, and Supreme Commander Velthax watched with cold satisfaction. This time there would be no surprise weapons, no unexpected tactics. His forces were spread wide enough to prevent concentrated attacks, and his numbers were overwhelming. "Begin the assault," he commanded. "Leave nothing alive." The battle that followed would be remembered for 10,000 years. Human ships, outnumbered nearly 5-1, fought with everything they had and more. Captain Tyler Morrison led Strike Group 7 into the heart of the enemy formation, his 11 remaining vessels targeting the Council's command ships. They destroyed 4 before plasma fire reduced his group to 2. "Keep fighting," Tyler transmitted to his surviving crew. "Keep fighting until you cannot fight anymore." His ship took a direct hit moments later, and the transmission cut to static. Secretary General Katie Morrison, watching from Earth, closed her eyes for a single moment, then opened them and kept watching. Her son had died as he lived, defiant to the end. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Brennan flew her fighter through a storm of energy that should have killed her a dozen times. Her squadron had been reduced to 5, then 3, then just her. She had run out of missiles an hour ago, and was now using her ship's thrusters to push debris into enemy vessels. When her fuel ran out, she aimed her fighter at the bridge of a Council cruiser and accelerated. Her last words were a laugh, bright and fierce and utterly unafraid. The civilian ships fought just as bravely. Cargo hauler Captain Brittany Cole navigated through fields of debris to deliver ammunition to the front lines, her vessel's hull cracking from damage that should have torn her apart. She made 17 supply runs before a Council destroyer finally caught her in open space. Mining ship commander Eric Santos used his vessel's industrial laser to cut through the armor of an enemy frigate, then rammed the wounded ship when the laser burned out. His crew of 12 died with him, but they took 200 Council warriors with them. And still humanity would not break. Supreme Commander Velthax watched his fleet's casualties climb past 1,000, then past 1,500, and he felt something he had never experienced in 3 millennia of warfare. Genuine fear. These humans were not fighting like a species trying to survive. They were fighting like a force of nature, like gravity or entropy, unstoppable and absolute. Supreme Commander, Ambassador Zorveth said quietly, "We are losing." "Impossible," Velthax replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "We still outnumber them. We still have superior technology." Numbers and technology mean nothing against an enemy who does not care if they die. For every ship we destroy, they take one of ours. Their civilians are fighting as hard as their military. Even their children would pick up weapons if we gave them the chance. Zorveth gestured to the tactical display where the battle raged in all its terrible glory. "We can win this battle," he said. "We can destroy their fleet, bombard their world, end their civilization. But we cannot break them, and if we cannot break them, more will come. They will rebuild, they will reproduce, they will remember. In 100 years, in 1,000, they will find us, and they will make us pay for what we did today." Velthax was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was hollow. "What would you have me do?" he asked. "End this, offer terms, accept them as equals, before they force us to accept them as conquerors." The Supreme Commander looked at the display, at the human ships that kept attacking despite impossible odds, at the civilian vessels that threw themselves into the fire to protect those who could not fight. He thought of the 47 species the Council had destroyed, and he wondered if any of them could have fought like this. None of them could have. Humanity was something new, something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that grew stronger under pressure, that burned brighter when darkness closed in, that simply refused to accept the limitations that governed other life. "Transmit a ceasefire request," he said finally. "Tell them we wish to negotiate." The transmission reached Admiral Harmon aboard the Defiance, and he stared at it in disbelief. Around him, his crew erupted in shouts of joy, but he raised his hand for silence. "This could be a trick," he said. "We keep fighting until we have confirmation." But it was not a trick. The Council fleet stopped its advance, and Zorveth's face appeared on the main screen. "Admiral Harmon," the ambassador said, "the Galactic Council requests a formal ceasefire. We wish to discuss terms for humanity's admission as full members of the Council." Harmon looked at the screen for a long moment, then he smiled. Not with joy, but with the grim satisfaction of a man who has walked through fire and emerged on the other side. "We will discuss terms," he replied, "but understand this. We will never accept anything less than complete equality. We will never bow, never serve, never accept protection. We are humanity, and we do not surrender." 3 days later, Secretary General Katie Morrison stood in the rebuilt Assembly Hall as the first Council ambassador arrived to negotiate not as a conqueror, but as an equal. She wore black for her son, but her eyes were dry, and her voice was strong. The treaty they signed would reshape the galaxy. Humanity was recognized as a sovereign power, free and independent, bound to the Council by alliance rather than subjugation. Other species, watching from across the stars, saw what had happened and began to dream of their own freedom. Ambassador Zorvath, in his final report to the Council elders, wrote words that would be studied by historians for 10,000 years. We believed choosing battle was their end. We did not understand that for humanity, choosing battle has always been their beginning. Admiral Harmon stood at a memorial for the fallen, reading names that stretched for miles. Beside him, Katie Morrison laid a wreath for Tyler, and she finally allowed herself to cry. Humanity had paid a terrible price for freedom. But, as the first Council vessels arrived, carrying ambassadors instead of soldiers, as alien diplomats descended to treat with humans as equals for the first time in galactic history, those who remained knew the truth. They had chosen battle when the galaxy expected submission. They had chosen to fight when mathematics demanded surrender. They had chosen to be human, stubborn, defiant, and utterly unwilling to go quietly into the dark. And in doing so, they had changed the stars forever.